There is a number sitting in the Cleveland Browns practice records right now that nobody in that organization wanted the public to see. Not the front office, not the coaching staff that ran the 2025 minicamp, and certainly not the quarterback room that handed out first-team reps like a private club with a guest list Shedeur Sanders was never invited to join. That number is 77.4%. And before this video is over, you are going to understand exactly why that percentage is one of the most important statistics in recent NFL history, not because of what it means on paper, but because of what it reveals about a system that spent over a year actively working against the young man who produced it. This is not a story about a quarterback who got lucky at practice. This is not a feel-good narrative about a rookie finding his footing. What happened at those minicamps, first in 2025, then again in 2026, is a story about suppression, selective transparency, a coaching staff caught playing favorites in broad daylight, and a player whose numbers kept climbing despite every institutional obstacle thrown directly in his path. By the time you finish watching this, you will understand why 143 franchises are currently sitting in their war rooms watching Shedeur Sanders complete passes at over 80% and doing the math on exactly how badly they miscalculated. But we start where all of this started. We start with zero. When Shedeur Sanders walked into the Cleveland Browns' required 2025 minicamp, there were 4 quarterbacks competing for position on that depth chart: Joe Flacco, Pickett, Deshaun Gabriel, and Shedeur. 4 quarterbacks, 5 open practices, 1 coaching staff making decisions about who gets what opportunities, and Kevin Stefanski made his choice before the first snap was ever taken. Flacco got first-team reps, Pickett got first-team reps, Gabriel got first-team reps, Shedeur got ball boys. That is not a metaphor or an exaggeration. While 3 other quarterbacks on that roster worked with starting caliber receivers, ran real route combinations with legitimate NFL targets, and built timing with players who would actually matter in a real game situation, Shedeur was out there throwing to whoever was left. No starters, no real receivers, no meaningful competition to sharpen against, and no genuine opportunity to demonstrate what he could do in a system that was supposedly evaluating all 4 quarterbacks equally. Stefanski stood in front of reporters during that camp and called it an installation phase. He told the media not to focus too much on who was receiving what reps. He framed it as a period of instruction, a teaching moment, a structured environment where everyone was simply learning the system at their own pace. What he did not do, what he conspicuously and carefully avoided doing, was explain why the quarterback who was statistically outperforming every other passer on that roster was the only one being denied the reps that would have made those numbers even higher. Because here is what the installation phase produced. Flacco, with his first-team reps and his veteran receivers in his favorable rep distribution, finished that camp at 51.4% completion. Pickett, with the same advantages and the same starting caliber targets, ended at 63%. Deshaun Gabriel came in at 57.8%. And Shedeur Sanders, working with ball boys, throwing to backups, operating in literally the worst possible competitive environment that coaching staff could legally construct during a minicamp, finished at 77.4% with 9 touchdowns and 1 interception. Let that settle for a moment. The quarterback who received 0 first-team reps, who threw to players that would not be on the Week 1 roster, who was given every possible disadvantage the coaching staff could manufacture within the rules of a professional practice setting, that quarterback walked out of those 5 sessions as the most accurate passer in the building by a margin that made the other 3 numbers look like a different sport. 77.4% is not a good completion percentage for a minicamp. It is a staggering one. It is the kind of number that makes scouts sit up straight. It is the kind of number that would have been the lead story on every NFL program in the country if it had belonged to Flacco or Pickett. And it was produced, this is the part that has to be said clearly, under conditions specifically designed to suppress it. The coaching staff did not give Shedeur the reps that would have helped him. They gave him the situation that was supposed to hurt him. and he responded by leading the entire quarterback room in every single statistical category that mattered. Stefanski's installation phase explanation did not hold up the moment those numbers went public, because you cannot tell reporters that reps don't matter and simultaneously explain why the quarterback who got 0 valuable reps finished 26 percentage points above the guy who got all of them. The numbers did not care about the framing. They sat there in the public record and told a story the coaching staff had not prepared a response for. And that was just 2025. What happened in 2026 was an entirely different level. Todd Monken took over offensive coordinator responsibilities heading into the mandatory minicamp, and the first thing that changed was the most important thing. Shedeur Sanders received first-team reps on day 1. That is the entire variable. That is the only meaningful difference between the 2025 situation and the 2026 situation. Same quarterback, same arm, same football IQ, same Shedeur Sanders who spent the previous camp throwing to whoever was standing on the sideline. The only adjustment was that someone in that building finally decided to treat him like the player the statistics had already proven him to be. Day 1 with actual first-team reps, working with real receivers against legitimate defensive looks, Shedeur went 25 for 30, that is 83.3% completion. He connected on deep touchdown throws to tight end David Bond and wide receiver Cedric Boston, the exact throws that critics had spent 12 months questioning whether he could make at the NFL level. The deep ball, the throw people said might not translate. The throw that supposedly needed more development before anyone could trust it in a real offense. On his very first day with meaningful reps, Shedeur Sanders went out and made those throws at 83.3% completion. The jump from 77.4 to 83.3 is not random. It is not luck. It is not a favorable matchup or a light defensive scheme. It is what happens when a player who has already demonstrated elite-level accuracy in the worst possible circumstances is finally given the same opportunity that everyone else in the room had been receiving for the entirety of the previous camp. The reps changed, the number went up, and the connection between those two facts is not subtle. Day 2 was a completely different kind of test, and this is where Monken's plan started to reveal itself as something more than most people initially recognized. The second session was not a repeat of day 1. Monken did not run the same route combinations, the same distance profiles, or the same scheme that had produced 83.3 the day before. Instead, he designed the session specifically around intermediate and short-range work, tighter windows, quicker decisions, faster release points, a totally different cognitive and physical demand on the quarterback. It was a purposeful curriculum. Monken was not just getting Shedeur comfortable, he was building something layer by layer, testing each range of the field in sequence, constructing a complete quarterback rather than letting him settle into whatever he already did well. Shedeur finished day 2 above 80% despite missing 2 passes during the entire session. 2 days, 2 completely different offensive schemes, 2 distinct distance profiles, 2 different types of defensive pressure and route geometry, and both sessions came in above 80% completion, both sessions came in above Deshaun Watson's numbers, and both sessions added a new dimension to a player that the previous coaching staff had spent a full calendar year pretending did not exist. The numbers were not protected, they were not softened. Every miss was in the public record, every incompletion was logged, and Shedeur still finished both days above the threshold that would make any reasonable evaluation conclude he was the most accurate quarterback on that roster. What was being protected, what was carefully managed and selectively recorded, were not Shedeur's numbers. That brings us to the part of this story that transformed a quarterback competition into something that belongs in a completely different conversation. On day 1 of the 2026 mandatory minicamp, Deshaun Watson threw an interception. This is a factual statement. It happened on the practice field in front of coaches, players, reporters, and everyone else present at a mandatory minicamp that the Cleveland Browns organization was fully aware would be covered and documented. Watson threw a pick, and it was caught, not just by the defender on the field, but by outside media members who had been watching the session in person before the tracker was updated. The official QB tracker, the tool the organization uses to log QB statistics from practice sessions and share them with the public and media, did not record that interception. That is not an accusation of deliberate intent. That is a documentation of what happened. The throw occurred, the interception occurred, the tracker did not reflect it. And the only reason anyone outside the building found out was because members of the outside media who had been watching the session in person had already noted it themselves before the tracker was updated.
Day 2. Watson threw another interception. Same mandatory minicamp, same public practice setting, same official QB tracker that is supposed to be the authoritative record of what happens on that field. And for the second consecutive day, that interception did not appear in the official numbers. This is where the audience stepped in. After day 1's omission was caught by outside reporters, fans who had already been tracking the discrepancy between what they were hearing from people at practice and what was appearing on the official tracker came into day 2 with a completely different level of attention. They were watching in real time. They were cross-referencing. They were doing the documentation work that the official tracker had declined to do on consecutive days. When Watson's second interception disappeared from the record, the people paying attention had already seen it go missing once. They were ready. Someone went directly to Daniel Oyefusi, the ESPN Cleveland beat reporter covering the minicamp, and asked him point-blank about the accuracy of the QB tracker. Oyefusi's response confirmed exactly what the suspicious fans had suspected. He stated clearly that he has nothing to do with the QB tracker. He is not responsible for what gets recorded. He is not the one deciding what appears and what disappears. The tracker is managed separately from independent media coverage, and what it chooses to include or not include is not something beat reporters have any control over. 2 Watson interceptions, 2 consecutive days, 2 disappearances from the official record, both caught because an audience that had already lost faith in the official story was doing the verification work themselves. Now consider what was happening simultaneously on the other side of that same practice field. Shedeur Sanders' statistics were fully visible, fully documented, and completely available in the public record. Every completion was logged, every incompletion was counted, every miss from the 2 he threw on day 2 was sitting right there in the numbers for anyone to examine. Nobody was softening his evaluation. Nobody was quietly removing the moments where he was less than perfect. His performance was being held to a standard of complete transparency that the Watson performance was clearly not being held to. That asymmetry is not a minor footnote. It is the context in which every comparison between these 2 quarterbacks has to be understood. Shedeur Sanders completed passes at over 80% across 2 different types of sessions, with every detail of his performance available for public scrutiny, while the quarterback listed above him on the depth chart was throwing interceptions that kept evaporating from official documentation until fans forced them back into the conversation. That gap in transparency is not a coincidence. It is a pattern that runs directly through the entire history of how this franchise has handled these 2 quarterbacks from the moment Shedeur Sanders arrived in Cleveland. The 77.4 from 2025 was produced under deliberate suppression. The 83.3 and 80+ from 2026 are being produced with genuine opportunity and complete transparency. And the numbers the organization would prefer to keep quiet are the ones that keep requiring outside intervention to stay in the public record. That contrast tells you everything you need to know about which quarterback is actually winning this competition on merit. It would be easy to look at Shedeur's day 1 numbers and call it a hot practice. NFL quarterbacks have good days, completion percentages fluctuate, camp performances do not always translate. These are the kinds of qualifications that get applied the moment a young quarterback does something impressive, and they are the kinds of qualifications that were absolutely ready to be deployed the moment Shedeur went 83.3 in his first real session with first-team reps. But then, day 2 happened, and day 2 was not designed to be easy.
Todd Monken has been around NFL offenses long enough to know exactly what he is doing when he structures a practice session. When he chose to make the second minicamp session an intermediate and short-range focused workload, different windows, different timing, different cognitive demands, he was not giving Shedeur a rest day or a confidence builder. He was running a curriculum. He was testing a specific range of the field in isolation to see what was actually there, separate from the deep ball success of day one. What this means is that the two sessions together constitute something more meaningful than 2 good days. They are 2 different examinations of 2 different aspects of the quarterback position, conducted back-to-back under deliberate structural conditions, and Shedeur passed both of them above 80%. The deep ball question got answered on day 1. The intermediate efficiency question got answered on day 2. The coaching staff is not guessing what they have. They have documentation across multiple distance profiles that their quarterback is operating at a level the previous coaching staff spent a year refusing to acknowledge.
Monken himself has been publicly clear about where his head is in this process. The relationship between him and Shedeur has been described by Shedeur directly as the foundation of everything happening on that field. When asked what Monken has done to help him most, Shedeur did not mention a specific route concept or a coverage adjustment or a physical technique. He said relationship. He said he never wants to disappoint his coaches. He said that even when a day looks good from the outside, if he knows internally that he left something on the field, that internal accountability is what drives him back to correct it. That kind of answer from a quarterback tells you what kind of player you are dealing with. It is not the answer of someone coasting on talent and waiting for circumstances to catch up to him. It is the answer of someone who has been operating with a standard for himself that was higher than the standard the previous coaching staff was holding him to, and who found a coaching relationship that finally matches the internal expectation he has been carrying since before he arrived in Cleveland. The 2-day curriculum produced 83.3% and 80+. The relationship produced the internal accountability that made both of those numbers possible. Monken did not discover something new about Shedeur Sanders in those sessions. He created the conditions for something that already existed to finally show itself without obstruction. Numbers are one thing. What happened to the culture of that entire organization is something the completion percentage cannot fully capture, and it requires a voice from inside the building to understand. During the 2026 mandatory minicamp, a veteran teammate, someone with enough NFL experience to have seen multiple locker rooms, multiple coaching staffs, multiple organizational cultures from the inside, stood in front of reporters and made a statement that should have stopped the entire sports media conversation in its tracks. He said the atmosphere in that building has changed. He did not say the quarterback is throwing the ball well. He did not say the offense looks more efficient. He said the entire energy of the organization has shifted, and he connected that shift directly to what has happened since Shedeur Sanders entered the building. He talked about accountability. He talked about urgency. He said that for years, nobody on that team had retaliated negatively during practice. Nobody fired back. Nobody competed with that edge that separates a practice squad mentality from a team that actually believes it can win something. Now, he said, Quinton is chirping at Shedeur. Shedeur is firing back at the tight ends and tackles. Todd Monken is getting into it on the sideline. The entire practice has a different temperature, and the veterans standing in front of those reporters had enough reference points to understand what that temperature means. He said, "We got fight." He said he has not seen this franchise have fight in a long time. A player with years of NFL experience, who has seen what winning cultures look and feel like from the inside, is telling reporters that the organizational energy changed as soon as one quarterback entered that building. Not as soon as the offensive scheme changed, not as soon as the coaching staff turned over. The energy changed when Shedeur arrived, and the veteran was specific enough about that connection to make it impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Shedeur confirmed the same thing from his own side of the locker room. He said the team is having a great time. He said it never feels like work. He said with all the personalities and players around him, no day feels like a grind because the environment itself is different from anything he expected to find when he got to Cleveland. He said it feels like a game. Connect those two accounts. A veteran with decades of professional experience says this franchise now has fight for the first time in years. A second-year quarterback who was passed over 143 times says coming to that building every day feels like playing a game rather than reporting to a job. The emotional environment of that facility has been transformed, and every person inside it, from the coaching staff to the veterans to the rookie who the previous front office did everything in its power to delay, is describing the same shift in the same language. That does not happen because a new offensive coordinator drew up better play designs. That happens because the right person finally walked through the right door, and the entire building reorganized itself around the energy that came in with him. There is a moment from the mandatory minicamp media availability that needs to be talked about separately from the statistics because it captures something about Shedeur Sanders that the completion percentages alone cannot fully express.
A reporter asked him about his footwork. A technical question, a fundamentals-level question about mechanics, the kind of question that gets asked to rookies and second-year quarterbacks when the media is still in the process of forming an opinion about whether the player is ready for the responsibility of being a starter in the NFL. The footwork question was, in the most generous interpretation, a reasonable evaluative inquiry. In a less generous reading, it was exactly the kind of grounding question designed to remind a young quarterback of his developmental status in a league that has historically not been quick to anoint anyone ahead of schedule. Shedeur's answer had nothing to do with his footwork. He redirected the entire conversation and told reporters that he is currently focused on being the greatest quarterback in the world. Not the best quarterback in this competition, not the best quarterback on this roster, not the best young quarterback in his draft class, the greatest quarterback in the world. He said it the way someone states a fact they have already processed and moved on from, not as a declaration designed to generate headlines, not as a motivational exercise, as a statement of current focus that happened to be the most accurate description of his internal orientation at that moment. The media room response to that kind of statement from a quarterback who at the time had not yet taken a meaningful first-team rep in an NFL regular season setting was predictable. It was the kind of bold claim that gets clipped and posted and used as evidence of either elite confidence or dangerous delusion, depending on which narrative serves the person doing the posting. But then you go back to what he produced on the field in the sessions surrounding that press conference. He said he is focused on being the greatest quarterback in the world. He then went out and completed passes at 83.3% on a deep ball heavy day 1 and above 80% on an intermediate heavy day 2. The same day he made that declaration to reporters, Watson threw his second consecutive interception that vanished from the official tracker until fans put it back. The contrast between what Shedeur said he was focused on and what Watson was producing in those same sessions was so sharp that the boldness of his press conference statement stopped looking like arrogance and started looking like precision. You do not complete passes at those rates across that many different session types without knowing something about where you actually are as a quarterback. Shedeur knows where he is. The statement was not an aspiration, it was an assessment. Before the Cleveland Browns selected Shedeur Sanders, 143 other picks went by. 143 selections made by NFL franchises that looked at the same player, assessed the same film, had access to the same combine data in pro day numbers, in college production, and decided to pass. Some of those decisions were positional, some were organizational, some were driven by the specific needs of specific rosters at specific moments in time. NFL draft evaluation is not a perfect science, and there are legitimate reasons why any individual pick might go in a direction that seems questionable in retrospect. But 143 of them, 143 opportunities to select a quarterback who, without a single first-team rep in his first professional minicamp, produced the highest completion rate and the most touchdowns of any passer in that setting. 143 chances to bring into a building a player who, the moment an actual offensive coordinator gave him actual first-team reps, immediately went to 83.3% on day 1 and stayed above 80% on a harder day 2. Every one of those franchises is now watching those completion percentages rise in real time. They are watching it knowing that the 77.4 was produced without any meaningful support. They're watching the 83%, knowing it represents what happens when a real development environment is finally constructed around a player who was ready for one a long time ago. They're watching the cultural transformation that a veteran teammate described in front of reporters, the fight, the urgency, the accountability, and they are doing the math on what they chose instead. Some of those franchises spent high picks on quarterbacks who are currently producing less than 77.4 in controlled, favorable practice environments with full first-team rep access. Some of them passed on Shedeur specifically because of concerns about his professional ceiling, his arm strength, his fit in modern NFL offenses. Those concerns are now being answered session by session on a practice field in Cleveland, and the answers are not complicated.
The ceiling was never the problem. This is the thing that the 2025 minicamp numbers made clear, and the 2026 numbers have confirmed beyond any reasonable dispute. A player who produces 77.4% with ball boys does not have a ceiling issue. A player who jumps to 83% the moment real reps become available does not have a ceiling issue. The ceiling was always there. What was missing, what the previous coaching staff either could not see or chose not to acknowledge, was the floor. The floor was never raised in 2025. Stefanski kept it deliberately low. 0 first-team reps, backup receivers, an installation phase explanation that did not explain the thing that needed explaining, and a public posture toward the media that amounted to asking reporters to please look somewhere else. The ceiling was fine. The floor was being kept down on purpose. When Monken raised the floor, when he gave Shedeur first-team reps and a real development curriculum and a relationship built on accountability rather than politics, the ceiling immediately stopped being a question. The number went from 77.4% to 83% in one session. Not because Shedeur improved, because the conditions finally matched the player. 143 franchises passed on that story. They can all see it now. It is worth putting every piece of this story in sequence because the individual data points are striking on their own, but the complete timeline is something else entirely. 2025 required minicamp. Kevin Stefanski distributes reps with 3 quarterbacks receiving first-team work and Shedeur receiving none. 5 sessions, ball boy receivers, no meaningful competitive opportunity. Stefanski tells reporters it's an installation phase and advises them to ignore the rep distribution. The results: Flacco 51.4%, Pickett 63%, Gabriel 57.8%, Shedeur Sanders with 0 first-team reps and backup-level targets 77.4% with 9 touchdowns in 1 interception. Most accurate passer in the building, highest touchdown total in the building. No acknowledgement from the coaching staff of what those numbers meant in context. 2026 mandatory minicamp. Todd Monken is running the offense. Day 1, Shedeur receives first-team reps for the first time. He goes 25 for 30, 83.3% completion. Deep touchdowns to Bond and Boston, the exact throws critics said needed more development, delivered at the highest completion rate in the session. Day 2, Monken designs a deliberate intermediate and short-range curriculum, different demands, tighter windows, quicker decisions. Shedeur finishes above 80% despite 2 misses, both days superior to Watson's numbers. Also during those 2 days, Watson throws interceptions on consecutive days that disappear from the official QB tracker on consecutive days. Day 1 omission caught by outside media, Day 2 omission caught by fans who were already watching in real time after the previous disappearance. Oifusi confirms he has nothing to do with the tracker. 2 pecks, 2 missing records, 2 crowdsourced corrections from an audience that stopped trusting the official account at face value because the official account has repeatedly failed to match what people in that building were actually seeing.
The question that everyone in and around the Cleveland Browns organization is now being forced to answer is not whether Shedeur Sanders can play in the NFL. That question was answered at the 2025 minicamp and answered again more definitively at the 2026 mandatory sessions. The question is what happens when a franchise finally has to publicly reconcile what its statistics say with what its depth chart reflects. Watson is still listed ahead of Shedeur on that depth chart. Watson threw interceptions on consecutive days that had to be recovered from official obscurity by fans doing crowdsourced documentation. Watson's numbers are being selectively managed in a way that Shedeur's numbers are not and have never been.
At some point, the depth chart and the statistics have to be in the same conversation. Monken is building a curriculum around Shedeur's development that suggests he already knows which direction that conversation is going to go. The veteran teammates' declaration about fight and urgency suggests the locker room already knows. Shedeur's press conference declaration about being focused on being the greatest quarterback in the world suggests that Shedeur already knows. The only people who appear not to know, or who are performing not knowing for as long as the performance is sustainable, are the ones responsible for the official depth chart and the official QB tracker, two documents that have been telling different stories than the practice field for going on 2 years now. The 77.4% was set in chains. The 83% is what it looks like when the chains come off. The fan base is doing the documentation work. The veteran is confirming the cultural shift. Monken is building the offensive system, and Shedeur Sanders is completing passes above 80% across every distance profile, every session type, and every competitive environment the Browns have been willing to put him in. The only remaining question is how long the people in charge of that building wait before they let the depth chart say what the practice field has been saying for 2 years. 143 picks went by. The Browns have the player has the numbers keep climbing. And every franchise that looked at this kid and looked away is watching it happen from a distance with absolutely nowhere to hide. This is not a completion percentage story. It is not a minicamp story. It is a story about what happens when an organization actively suppresses a talent it does not have the courage to commit to. What happens when a new coaching staff removes that suppression, and what happens when the talent in question turns out to be exactly as dangerous as the numbers always said it was. Shedeur Sanders did not come to Cleveland to blend in. He arrived to expose something, and the only question left is whether Cleveland is ready to let him finish the job. If you think this story is just getting started, because it absolutely is, hit the like button, subscribe, and drop in the comments where you think Shedeur's completion percentage lands by week 1. The number is still climbing. Don't miss what comes next.